The luxury sports car careened wildly across the rain-slicked highway, its tires screaming against the wet asphalt as it spun out of control. Metal shrieked against concrete as the vehicle slammed into the guardrail, flipped once, twice, and came to rest upside down near the edge of the Han River. Flames erupted from beneath the crumpled hood, licking hungrily at the night air. Inside, slumped against the deflated airbag, a man hung unconscious, blood trickling down his temple. Amara Okafor was walking home from her shift at Seoul National University Hospital when the crash happened, barely 50 meters ahead of her. For a split second, she froze, her exhausted mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Then her training kicked in. She dropped her bag and ran toward the wreckage, her heart hammering against her ribs. The heat from the fire hit her face like a physical blow as she got closer, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. "Hey, can you hear me?" she shouted, dropping to her knees beside the driver's side window. The door was crushed inward. The window shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces across the wet pavement. Through the twisted metal frame, she could see him clearly now. A young man, maybe around her age, wearing an expensive suit that was now torn and stained with blood. His chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. The flames were spreading. Amara could hear the crackling intensify, could smell the acrid stench of burning rubber and gasoline. She had maybe a minute, maybe less. She grabbed the door handle and pulled with everything she had, ignoring the sharp edges of broken glass that bit into her palms. The door wouldn't budge. She repositioned herself, planted her feet, and pulled again, screaming with the effort. The metal groaned and gave way just enough for her to squeeze her arm through and unbuckle his seatbelt. He fell toward her, dead weight, and she nearly went down under the impact. But she held on, wrapping her arms around his torso and dragging him backward away from the car. Her scrubs were soaked through with rain and blood, her muscles burning as she hauled him across the pavement. They had barely made it 10 meters when the car exploded behind them, the force of the blast throwing her forward onto the ground beside him. For a moment, Amara just lay there, gasping, her ears ringing from the explosion. Then she remembered where she was and what she needed to do. She pushed herself up, ignoring the pain shooting through her scraped knees and bleeding hands, and knelt beside the man. His face was pale, his lips tinged with blue. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck, searching for a pulse. It was there, but weak, thready, barely clinging to life. "No, no, no," she muttered, tilting his head back to open his airway. She leaned down, listening for breath sounds. Nothing. Her hands found the center of his chest, and she began compressions, counting out loud in English because Korean numbers still didn't come naturally to her under pressure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. After 30 compressions, she pinched his nose, covered his mouth with hers, and gave 2 rescue breaths. Then back to compressions. "Come on," she pleaded between counts. "Come on, breathe, breathe." She lost track of how many cycles she performed. Her arms were shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but she refused to stop. She couldn't lose him. Not like this. Not when she just pulled him from the flames. "Please," she whispered, starting another round of compressions. "Please don't die." And then he coughed. Water and blood spilled from his mouth as his chest suddenly heaved with a desperate, rattling breath. Amara quickly turned him on his side, supporting his head as he choked and gasped, his body fighting its way back to consciousness. Relief flooded through her so intensely that tears sprang to her eyes. "You're okay," she said, her voice shaking. "You're going to be okay. Just keep breathing." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Red and blue lights painted the scene as emergency vehicles arrived. Paramedics rushed over, and Amara found herself being gently but firmly moved aside as they took over. She stood there, swaying slightly, watching as they loaded him onto a stretcher and into the ambulance. One of the paramedics, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, touched her shoulder. "You saved his life," he said in Korean. "What you did, that was incredibly brave." Amara nodded numbly. Not trusting herself to speak, she watched the ambulance speed away, its sirens fading into the soul night. And only then did she realize that her whole body was trembling. A police officer approached her, asking questions she barely registered, taking her statement in halting Korean while she tried to explain what had happened. Yes, she was a medical intern. No, she didn't know the man. She'd just been walking home from her shift. She'd seen the crash and reacted. By the time they let her go, it was past 2 in the morning. Amara picked up her bag from where she dropped it on the sidewalk and began the long walk back to her tiny apartment in Itaewon. Her hands had stopped bleeding, but they throbbed painfully. Her scrubs were ruined, covered in blood and soot and gasoline stains that would never come out. But she was alive. And so was he, whoever he was. She climbed the 4 flights of stairs to her apartment, her legs feeling like lead. Inside, the studio was dark and cold. She didn't bother turning on the lights, just stripped off her ruined scrubs and stood under the shower until the water ran clear. Only then, in the privacy of her bathroom, did she allow herself to break down, sliding down the tiled wall until she sat on the floor, with her knees pulled to her chest, crying with a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and the bone-deep loneliness that had been her constant companion since she'd arrived in Korea 2 years ago. Her phone buzzed on the bathroom counter. A message from her younger sister in Lagos. "Amara, are you okay? You haven't called in 3 days. Mama's photo fell off the wall today. I think she's watching over you." Amara typed back with shaking fingers. "I'm fine. Just tired. Tell Mama I'm trying to make her proud." She thought of her mother then, of the woman who had cleaned houses and sold vegetables in the market to save enough money to send Amara to medical school. The woman who had died of a treatable infection because she couldn't afford the hospital bills, because she'd spent every nara she had on her daughter's education instead of her own health. Amara had made a promise at her mother's bedside. A promise that she would become the kind of doctor who would never let someone die because they couldn't pay. A promise that had brought her here, to Seoul, to one of the best medical programs in Asia, where she worked herself to exhaustion while facing 1,000 small cruelties from people who looked at her skin and saw only an outsider. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, she had saved a life with her bare hands, and that had to count for something. The next morning, Amara woke to her phone, ringing incessantly. She groaned and reached for it, squinting at the screen through bleary eyes. 14 missed calls, 23 text messages. What on earth? She opened the first message, from her roommate Minji, who was visiting family in Busan. "Amara, you're on the news. Oh my God, you're a hero." Confused, Amara opened her news app. The headline at the top of the feed made her breath catch. Billionaire heir Lee Min-hoon in critical condition, following fiery crash, saved by unknown foreign woman. Below it was a grainy photo, clearly taken by a bystander's phone, showing her performing CPR on the rain-soaked pavement, her face intense with concentration. Her hands pressed against the chest of the man she now knew was Lee Min-hoon. The article described him as the only son of Chairman Lee Dong-wook, one of Korea's wealthiest businessmen, heir to the Lee Holdings conglomerate that controlled everything from electronics to construction to entertainment. The man she'd saved wasn't just anyone. He was Korean royalty. Amara's stomach twisted with anxiety. The article mentioned that she was a medical intern, that she'd performed emergency CPR at the scene, that the victim had been stabilized and transferred to a private hospital. But it didn't name her, thankfully. The last thing she needed was attention. She forced herself out of bed, wincing at the soreness in her muscles. Her hands were bandaged where she'd cut them on the broken glass. She had a shift starting in 2 hours, and she needed to pretend that last night had never happened. That's what she was good at, after all. Putting her head down, doing the work, surviving. The hospital was buzzing with gossip when she arrived. Everyone had seen the news. Everyone wanted to know if she'd been the one who'd saved Lee Min-hoon. Amara deflected the questions as best she could. But by lunchtime, her supervisor, Dr. Park, called her into his office. "Dr. Okafor," he said, his expression grave, "I've received several calls this morning from Lee Holdings. They want to know how to contact the woman who saved their son." Amara's heart sank. "Sir, I'd really prefer not to get involved. I just did what anyone would have done." Dr. Park studied her for a long moment. "They're offering a substantial donation to a hospital, and they're being very insistent about expressing their gratitude properly." "I don't want their money," Amara said firmly. "It's not about what you want," Dr. Park replied, his tone sharp. "Lee Holdings is one of our major benefactors. If they want to thank you, you'll accept graciously. Is that understood?" Amara felt anger flare in her chest, but she swallowed it down. She couldn't afford to antagonize her supervisor, not when her visa status depended on maintaining her position. "Yes, sir." 3 days later, a man in an immaculate black suit appeared at the hospital's main entrance, asking for Dr. Amara Okafor. He introduced himself as Secretary Jung, assistant to Lee Min-hoon, and presented her with a heavy, cream-colored envelope embossed with gold lettering. "Mr. Lee would like to meet you personally to express his gratitude," Secretary Jung said in perfect English. "A car will pick you up tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. "That's really not necessary," Amara protested. "I'm just glad he's recovering." Secretary Jung's expression remained professionally neutral. "Mr. Lee was quite insistent, Dr. Okafor. The Lee family doesn't forget those who've shown them kindness." The next evening, Amara found herself sitting in the back of a Mercedes sedan, being driven through the exclusive Gangnam district to a private hospital that looked more like a 5-star hotel than a medical facility. She'd worn her best dress, a simple blue number that her mother had bought her before she left Nigeria, and she felt painfully underdressed as she walked through marble hallways lined with expensive artwork. Secretary Jung led her to a private suite on the top floor. He knocked twice, then opened the door, gesturing for her to enter. The room was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Seoul skyline. But Amara barely noticed the view. Her attention was fixed on the man sitting in the leather chair by the window, his left arm in a sling, a bandage wrapped around his forehead, but very much alive and very much awake. Lee Min-hoon looked different in person than he had on the rain-soaked pavement. His face was sharply handsome, all clean lines and perfect symmetry. The kind of face that graced magazine covers and billboard advertisements. His dark eyes were intense, intelligent, studying her with an interest that made her uncomfortable. "So you're the woman who saved my life," he said in English, his voice smooth and cultured. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Please sit." Amara sat, keeping her spine straight, her hands folded in her lap. "How are you feeling, Mr. Lee?" "Like I got hit by a truck," he said with a slight smile. "But alive, thanks to you. The doctors said that without your immediate intervention, I would have died before the ambulance arrived." I did what any doctor would do. "But you're not a doctor yet, are you? You're still an intern." He leaned forward slightly. "Do you know what your actions that night cost you, Dr. Okafor?" Amara frowned, confused. "Cost me? You injured your hands. You could have been killed when the car exploded. You risked your own life to save a complete stranger." His gaze didn't waver from hers. "Why?" The question caught her off guard. She'd expected gratitude, maybe a formal thank you, and a large check she'd refuse. She hadn't expected this intensity, this genuine curiosity. "Because that's what you do," she said finally. "When someone needs help, you help them. It doesn't matter who they are." Min-hoon was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he reached for a folder on the side table and handed it to her. "My family has arranged a reward for your bravery. Inside, you'll find a check for 100 million won, as well as an offer for a full-time position at our family's private medical center once you complete your residency. We've also arranged to pay off any student debt you might have." Amara opened the folder, looked at the check with its absurd number of zeros, and closed it again. She set it gently on the table between them. "I can't accept this." Min-hoon's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me? I didn't save you for money, Mr. Lee. I saved you because you were dying, and I had the skills to help, that's all." For a long moment, he just stared at her, as if she were a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Nobody turns down 100 million won. "I do." Amara stood. "I'm glad you're recovering, but I really should go. I have an early shift tomorrow." "Wait." Min-hoon stood as well, moving toward her with a slight wince of pain. "At least let me take you to dinner, to say thank you properly. That's really not necessary." "I know it's not necessary." His smile was genuine now, reaching his eyes. "But I'd like to. Please. One dinner, then I'll leave you alone if that's what you want." Amara hesitated. Every instinct told her to say no, to walk away, to keep the careful distance she'd maintained between herself and Korean high society for 2 years. But there was something in his eyes, a loneliness that she recognized because she saw it in her own mirror every morning. One dinner, she agreed finally, but somewhere normal, not some expensive restaurant. His smile widened. Deal. That first dinner turned into a second, then a third. Min-hoon was surprisingly easy to talk to once he stopped trying to impress her with his wealth and status. He was funny, self-deprecating, curious about her life and her experiences in Korea. He asked about Nigeria, about her family, about why she'd chosen medicine. And in return, she slowly began to understand the man behind the carefully constructed public image. He told her about growing up in a gilded cage, every moment of his life planned and choreographed by his father. About the loneliness of being groomed for a role he'd never wanted. Of having friends who only cared about his last name. Of relationships that were little more than business transactions. He told her about his mother, who died when he was 12, and how her death had turned his father into a cold, distant man obsessed with legacy and power. "Sometimes I think about what it would be like to just disappear," he said one evening as they sat in a pojangmacha, a street food tent in Dongdaemun, sharing tteokbokki and soju. To go somewhere where nobody knows who I am. To just be normal. "Normal is overrated," Amara said, taking a sip of her soju. "But I understand what you mean. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice coming here. Korea is beautiful, and the medical program is incredible. But it's lonely. People look at me, and they see my skin first, my accent second. They don't see me. Min-hoon reached across the small table and took her hand. I see you, Amara. The moment stretched between them, intimate and vulnerable. Then Amara gently pulled her hand back, her cheeks warm. It's getting late. I should get home. Let me drive you. I can take the subway. Amara. His voice was soft but insistent. Please, it's the least I can do. As they drove through Seoul's neon-lit streets, Amara felt something shift inside her chest. A loosening of the wall she'd built so carefully around her heart. It was dangerous, she knew. Min-hoon lived in a different world. A world of privilege and power that would never truly accept her. But in this moment, sitting beside him in the quiet comfort of his car, she let herself imagine what it might be like if things were different. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a pattern. Min-hoon would show up at the hospital after her shifts with coffee and snacks, and they'd walk along the Han River, talking about everything and nothing. He introduced her to his favorite spots in Seoul, the hidden places that tourists never saw. She taught him about Nigerian culture, made him try her favorite dishes from the African restaurants in Itaewon, laughed at his attempts to handle the spice levels. One Saturday afternoon, she dragged him to a volunteer clinic in Gangbuk, where she spent her rare days off treating migrant workers who couldn't afford regular health care. Min-hoon watched her work with quiet admiration, seeing her in her element, fierce and compassionate and completely dedicated to her patients. Afterward, as they walked to the subway station, he said, "You're going to be an incredible doctor, Amara. The kind of doctor who changes lives." "I hope so," she said quietly. "I made a promise to my mother that I'd use my skills to help people who couldn't help themselves. That I'd never let money be the reason someone dies." Min-hoon stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Your mother must have been an amazing woman to raise someone like you." Tears pricked at Amara's eyes. "She was. She gave up everything for me, and I miss her every single day." Without thinking, Min-hoon pulled her into a hug. Amara stiffened for just a moment, then melted into his embrace, letting herself be comforted for the first time in months. They stood there on the busy street wrapped in each other's arms, while the world rushed past them. But the world was watching. A photograph, taken by someone with a smartphone and uploaded to social media, spread like wildfire. By Monday morning, the image was everywhere. Lee Min-hoon, billionaire heir, embracing a black woman on a public street. The caption read, "Lee Min-hoon's secret foreign girlfriend." The backlash was immediate and vicious. Comments flooded in, most of them in Korean, many of them racist beyond belief. Amara's social media accounts, which had been private but were somehow found and shared, were bombarded with hate messages. At the hospital, she felt eyes following her everywhere, heard whispers that stopped abruptly when she entered a room. Dr. Park called her into his office again. This time, his expression was grim. "Dr. Okafor, I need you to understand the position you're putting this hospital in. Lee Holdings is one of our primary benefactors, and Chairman Lee is not happy about these rumors involving his son." "Sir, I don't care what the truth is," Dr. Park interrupted. "What I care about is that you're becoming a distraction. I'm going to be very clear with you. You need to distance yourself from Lee Min-hoon immediately. If this continues, I'll have no choice but to recommend that your internship not be renewed. Do you understand?" The threat hit Amara like a physical blow. Without her internship, she'd lose her visa. She'd have to return to Nigeria, her dreams of becoming a doctor unfulfilled. her mother's sacrifice meaningless. "Yes, sir," she managed to say. "I understand." That evening, when Min-hoon called to invite her to dinner, she ignored it. And the next call, and the next. She threw herself into her work, taking extra shifts, volunteering for the most difficult cases. Anything to keep her mind occupied. But Min-hoon was persistent. He showed up at the hospital with flowers, with food, with handwritten notes. Each time, she turned him away, her heart breaking a little more with each rejection. Finally, he cornered her in the hospital parking lot after a particularly grueling 36-hour shift. She was exhausted, running on nothing but coffee and stubbornness. And she didn't have the energy to maintain her walls. "Amara, please," he said, stepping in front of her. "Just talk to me. Tell me what I did wrong." "You didn't do anything wrong," she said, her voice cracking. "That's the problem. You're you, and I'm me. And there's no world where this ends well." "What are you talking about? Have you seen what people are saying about me? About us?" The words poured out of her, months of frustration and hurt bubbling to the surface. "They're calling me a gold digger, a seductress, worse things I won't even repeat. I'm getting death threats, Min-hoon. And my supervisor told me that if I don't stay away from you, I'll lose my position here. This is my career, my entire future, and I can't throw it away for what?" Min-hoon's voice was sharp. "For me? Is that what you were going to say?" "Yes." The admission came out as a shout. "I can't throw it away for you because we both know this can't last. Your world doesn't want me in it. Your father probably hates me. And eventually you'll realize that I'm not worth all this trouble." Min-hoon stepped closer, his eyes blazing with an intensity that took her breath away. "You think I care what people say? You think I care about my father's approval? Amara, you saved my life, but more than that, you gave me a reason to want to live it. Before I met you, I was just going through the motions, playing the role everyone expected me to play. But when I'm with you, I feel like I can breathe for the first time in my life." "Min-hoon." "I love you, Tohish," he said, the words falling into the space between them like stones into still water. "I love you, Amara, and I don't care who knows it." Amara's breath caught in her throat. Nobody had ever said those words to her before. Not like this. Not with such raw honesty and vulnerability. She wanted to say them back, wanted to fall into his arms and forget about the rest of the world. But fear held her back. The fear of losing everything she'd worked so hard to build. "I can't," she whispered. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this." She walked away, leaving him standing alone in the parking lot. And she didn't look back, because if she did, she knew she'd never be able to leave. 2 weeks later, Chairman Lee called a press conference. Amara watched it on the hospital break room television, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The room was packed with reporters, cameras flashing as the elderly billionaire stepped up to the podium. "Thank you all for coming," Chairman Lee said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I'm here today to make an announcement regarding my son, Lee Min-hoon. It has been decided that he will marry the eldest daughter of Senator Park, Miss Park Ji-woo. The engagement will be formally announced next month, with the wedding to follow in the spring." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Amara heard the words, but they didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. He told her he loved her. Just 2 weeks ago, he'd stood in the parking lot and told her she was worth fighting for. And now he was engaged to someone else? One of the nurses, Min-jung, who'd always been kind to her, touched her shoulder gently. "Amara, are you okay? You look pale." "I'm fine," Amara lied. "I just need some air." She made it to the bathroom before the tears came, great racking sobs that shook her entire body. She'd been right to push him away. She'd been right to protect her heart. This was exactly what she'd feared would happen. He was a Lee, and she was nobody. And in the end, that was all that mattered. But the pain was worse than anything she'd imagined. It felt like being torn apart from the inside, like losing her mother all over again. Like every dream she'd ever had was turning to ash in her hands. She didn't hear from Min-hoon after that. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits to the hospital. It was like he'd simply vanished from her life as suddenly as he'd entered it. The gossip died down, replaced by excited speculation about the upcoming engagement. Amara tried to move on, burying herself even deeper in her work. But every night she'd lie awake in her apartment, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he ever thought about her the way she thought about him. 3 weeks after the press conference, Amara was working the night shift in the emergency department when the news broke. It started as a rumor, whispered between nurses, then confirmed by a breaking news alert on someone's phone. Lee Min-hoon had publicly refused the arranged engagement. The press conference he'd called was being live-streamed. Amara found herself huddled around a computer monitor, with half the ER staff watching as Min-hoon faced down a room full of reporters, with his father standing stone-faced beside him. "I appreciate my father's concern for my future," Min-hoon said, his voice steady and clear. "But I can't marry Miss Park. I can't marry anyone except the woman I love." The reporters erupted with questions, but Min-hoon held up a hand for silence. "Her name is Dr. Amara Okafor. She's a medical intern here in Seoul. She saved my life once, and then she changed it forever. I know that our relationship is unconventional. I know that many people disapprove, but I don't care. I love her, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving to her that our love is worth fighting for." Chairman Lee stepped away from the podium without a word, his face a mask of cold fury. The camera caught him leaving the press conference, and then it cut back to Min-hoon, who was still standing there, looking directly into the camera as if he could see through it to where Amara was watching. "Amara," he said, his voice softer now, "if you're watching this, please know that I meant every word I said to you in that parking lot. I love you, and I'll wait as long as it takes for you to believe it." The break room erupted in chaos. Everyone was talking at once, some congratulating Amara, others looking scandalized, a few filming her reaction on their phones. Amara stood frozen, her mind reeling. What had he done? He'd just publicly declared his love for her, defied his father, ruined his engagement, all for her. It was the most romantic and the most terrifying thing anyone had ever done. Dr. Park appeared in the doorway, his face red with anger. "Dr. Okafor, my office now." She followed him numbly, knowing what was coming. He didn't even wait for her to sit down before he started. "Pack your things. You're suspended indefinitely. The board will review your case, but I expect they'll terminate your position by the end of the week. Sir, please. You were warned, Dr. Okafor. You were explicitly told to stay away from Lee Min-hoon. And instead you've managed to create a scandal that's brought international attention to this hospital. Chairman Lee has already called the hospital director twice this evening, furious about his son's behavior. Your presence here is untenable." Amara felt a world crumbling around her. "I didn't ask him to do this. I walked away from him. I did everything you asked me to do. And yet here we are." Dr. Park's expression was implacable. "I'm sorry, Dr. Okafor, but this is bigger than you or your feelings. This hospital cannot afford to be caught in the middle of a Lee family drama. She left the hospital that night with her few personal belongings in a cardboard box. Her career in ruins, her visa status in jeopardy. The press had already found out where she lived. There were reporters camped outside her apartment building, shouting questions as she pushed past them. Her phone was exploding with messages, some supportive, most hateful. The racist comments had intensified tenfold. People were calling for her to be deported, accusing her of seducing Min-hoon for his money, saying things so vile that she had to turn off her phone just to keep from breaking down completely. She spent the next 3 days holed up in her apartment, surviving on ramyeon and heartbreak. Her landlord had called to say that he was terminating her lease early. The hospital had officially dismissed her. Her visa would expire in 30 days, and without a sponsor, she'd have no choice but to return to Nigeria in shame. Everything she'd worked for, everything her mother had sacrificed for, gone because she'd fallen in love with the wrong man. On the 4th day, there was a knock on her door. Amara ignored it, assuming it was another reporter. But the knocking persisted, gentle but insistent. "Amara, please." Min-hoon's voice came through the door. "I know you're in there. I just want to talk." She stayed silent, curled up on her couch, her arms wrapped around her knees. "I know I ruined everything," he continued. "I know you're angry with me. You have every right to be. But please just let me explain. Let me fix this." "You can't fix this," Amara called back, her voice hoarse from crying. "You can't fix any of it. Go away, Min-hoon. Go back to your life and leave me alone." "I can't do that." "Why not?" "Because I love you." His voice cracked with emotion. "Because every day without you feels like drowning. Because you're the only person who's ever seen me for who I really am, not what I represent. Because..." Amara opened the door. Min-hoon stood in the hallway, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were red-rimmed, his usually perfect hair disheveled. In his hands, he held a bouquet of sunflowers, her favorite. "Because what?" she whispered. "Because you're my second chance," he said simply. "You gave me my life back that night by the river. And then you gave it meaning. Without you, I'm just going through the motions again. With you, I'm alive. Your father hates me. The entire country hates me. I lost my job because of you. I have to leave Korea in 3 weeks. Then we'll go somewhere else. Anywhere you want. I'll give up everything, the company, the money, all of it. We can start over together." Amara shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand. I can't let you do that. I can't be the reason you lose your family, your legacy. It would destroy you eventually. And then you'd resent me for it. The only thing that would destroy me is losing you." Min-hoon set down the flowers and took her hands in his. "I've spent my entire life doing what other people expected of me. For once, just once, I want to do what makes me happy. And you make me happy, Amara. You make me want to be better, to do better. Please don't take that away from me." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But she learned the hard way that love wasn't always enough, that sometimes the obstacles were just too big to overcome. Min-hoon! Her phone, which was sitting on the coffee table, suddenly blared with an emergency alert. They both turned to look at it, and Amara's blood ran cold as she read the news notification. Lee Min-hoon's vehicle ambushed, heir to Lee Holdings in critical condition. But Min-hoon was standing right here in front of her, alive and well. She looked up at him in confusion and saw the color drain from his face as he read the alert. "That's my car," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I lent it to Secretary Jung this morning. He said he needed to pick up some documents from the office." Amara's medical training kicked in immediately. We need to get to the hospital now. They arrived at Seoul National University Hospital to find chaos. Secretary Jung had been rushed into emergency surgery. The attack had been brutal and calculated. His car had been forced off the road in the same location where Min-hoon's accident had occurred months before. This was no coincidence. This was a message. Min-hoon paced the waiting room like a caged animal, his hands clenched into fists, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. This was meant for me, he kept saying. This should have been me. Amara wanted to comfort him, but she didn't know how. Instead, she focused on what she could do. She spoke to the surgeons, used her medical knowledge to understand the extent of Secretary Jung's injuries, kept Min-hoon informed with honest updates rather than false reassurances. He was her patient now, in a way, and she would treat him as she would any other person, drowning in fear and guilt. Hours passed. Chairman Lee arrived, his face a thundercloud of fury. He barely acknowledged Amara's presence, focusing entirely on his son. "I told you this would happen," he said, his voice cold. "I told you that making enemies of powerful people would have consequences. Senator Park's family is one of the most influential in the country. When you embarrassed his daughter publicly, you made an enemy you couldn't afford. So what would you have me do?" Min-hoon shot back, his voice rising. "Marry a woman I don't love to keep the peace? Live a lie for the rest of my life?" "Yes," Chairman Lee's composure finally cracked. "If that's what it takes to protect this family, then yes. Your personal happiness is not more important than the Lee legacy." "Then maybe the Lee legacy deserves to die," Min-hoon said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Father and son stared at each other across an unbridgeable chasm of expectations and disappointments. It was Amara who finally broke the tension. "Excuse me," she said softly, "but Secretary Jung is out of surgery. The doctor said he's stable but critical. He'll need extensive recovery time, but he's going to survive." Both men turned to look at her, as if they'd forgotten she was there. Chairman Lee's gaze swept over her with obvious distaste, but before he could say anything, a commotion erupted at the entrance to the surgical wing. Reporters had somehow gotten past security and were flooding the hallway, cameras flashing, microphones extended, shouting questions all at once. "Mr. Lee, is it true this attack was ordered by Senator Park?" "Chairman Lee, do you blame your son's relationship for this incident?" "Dr. Okafor, how does it feel knowing your presence has endangered the Lee family?" Security guards rushed to push them back, but the damage was done. The narrative was already being written. Amara saw it in the reporters' hungry eyes, in the way their questions were designed to create division and drama. By tomorrow morning, she would be blamed for this attack, for Secretary Jung's injuries, for everything wrong in Min-hoon's life. She turned and walked away, pushing through a side exit to escape the chaos. Behind her, she heard Min-hoon calling her name, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Everything she touched turned to disaster. Everyone she cared about got hurt. Maybe it was time to accept that some stories didn't get happy endings. She made it 3 blocks from the hospital before Min-hoon caught up with her, grabbing her arm gently but firmly. "Where are you going?" "Home, to pack. To buy a plane ticket back to Lagos. To get out of your life before anyone else gets hurt because of me." "Amara, this isn't your fault. Isn't it?" She spun to face him, anger and grief warring in her chest. "Secretary Jung is lying in a hospital bed because someone wanted to hurt you. And they wanted to hurt you because of me. Your father looks at me like I'm some kind of disease. The entire country thinks I'm a gold-digging foreigner who seduced you for your money. How many more people have to suffer before you realize that we were never meant to be together? I don't believe in meant to be, Min-hoon said fiercely. I believe in choosing, and I choose you, Amara. Every single day, I choose you. Well, maybe I don't choose this. The words exploded out of her. Maybe I don't choose a life where I'm constantly vilified and threatened. Maybe I don't choose to be the reason a good man nearly died. Maybe I choose my dignity and my safety and my sanity over a relationship that's only brought me pain. The hurt that flashed across Min-hoon's face was like a knife to her heart, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. She had to make him understand. She had to make him let her go. If that's really what you want, he said finally, his voice hollow, then I won't stop you. I'll respect your decision, but I need you to know something first. He pulled out his phone and showed her a news article. This came out an hour ago. The headline read, "Exclusive interview. Secretary Jung speaks from hospital bed." Below it was a video. Amara pressed play with shaking fingers. Secretary Jung, pale and connected to various monitors, looked directly into the camera. "I need to make something very clear," he said, his voice weak but determined. "The attack on me today was not random, and it had nothing to do with Dr. Okafor. It was orchestrated by certain business rivals who want to destabilize Lee Holdings by turning Chairman Lee against his son. They believe that by creating chaos in the family, they can gain leverage in upcoming merger negotiations. Dr. Okafor is innocent. She's a hero who saved Mr. Lee's life, and she doesn't deserve the hatred that's been directed at her. I'm speaking out now because I refuse to let good people be destroyed by corporate greed and political maneuvering." The video ended. Amara stood frozen, her mind trying to process what she'd just heard. "Secretary Young risked his career to tell that truth," Min-hoon said quietly, "because he believes in doing what's right, even when it's hard. Just like you do. Just like you've always done." "I don't understand. If it wasn't about me, then why?" "Because powerful people don't like when other powerful people step out of line. My father has enemies, business rivals, who would love to see Lee Holdings weakened by internal family conflict. When I refused the engagement, they saw an opportunity. They created a narrative that would divide us, turn public opinion against you, make my father choose between me and the company. It almost worked." Amara sank down onto a nearby bench, her legs suddenly unable to support her. So all of this, the hate, the threats, the attack on Secretary Jung, it was all just business. "Welcome to my world," Min-hoon said bitterly, sitting beside her. "Where nothing is personal, because everything is business. Where people are just chess pieces to be moved around the board. It's why I fell in love with you, Amara. You're the only real thing in my life. The only person who sees me as a human being instead of a transaction." They sat in silence for a long moment, the soul night settling around them. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. Traffic hummed. The city breathed and pulsed with life, and Amara felt something shift inside her, a subtle realignment of her understanding. She'd been so focused on protecting herself, on avoiding pain, that she'd forgotten what her mother had taught her. Love wasn't about safety. Love was about courage. It was about standing beside someone even when the world was against you. It was about choosing, as Min-hoon had said, to fight for something that mattered. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "I'm terrified of loving you and losing you, of giving up everything and having it not be enough, of waking up one day and realizing that we couldn't overcome the obstacles between us. I'm scared too," Min-hoon confessed. I'm terrified that I'm not good enough for you, that I'll disappoint you, that my world will break you, the way it's broken so many other good things. But I'm more terrified of not trying, of spending the rest of my life wondering what we could have been. Amara turned to look at him. Really look at him. She saw the boy who'd lost his mother too young and learned to hide his heart behind walls of wealth. She saw the man who'd risked everything for a chance at genuine love. She saw her future, uncertain and scary and beautiful. One condition, she said finally. Anything. I need to finish my medical training. I need to become the doctor I promised my mother I'd be. That's non-negotiable. Min-hoon's face broke into the first genuine smile she'd seen in weeks. I wouldn't dream of asking you to give that up. We'll find another program, another hospital. I'll hire the best lawyers to handle your visa issues, whatever it takes. And I need you to understand that I'm not going to be the kind of girlfriend who hides in the shadows. If we do this, we do it publicly, honestly, without apologies. I won't be ashamed of who I am or where I come from. Good, Min-hoon said fiercely. Because I'm not ashamed either. I'm proud. I'm proud to love you. Amara leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the tension drain from her body for the first time in weeks. Your father is going to hate this. Probably, but he'll get over it. Eventually. The media is going to have a field day. Let them. We'll write our own story. She smiled despite herself. When did you become such an optimist? The night you saved my life, he said simply. I figured if I could survive a burning car crash, I could survive anything, even falling in love. They sat there on that bench for hours, talking about everything and nothing, making plans and promises, slowly stitching together a future from the fragments of their shattered present. By the time dawn broke over Seoul, Amara felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Secretary Jung's revelation had shifted public opinion, at least somewhat. There were still hateful comments and ugly threats, but there was also support. People who believed in love across boundaries, who admired Amara's courage and dedication, who saw their story as something beautiful rather than scandalous. Min-hoon used his family's resources to find Amara a position at a prestigious international medical program with partnerships in Seoul and Europe. Her visa issues were resolved through proper legal channels. The hospital reinstated her with a formal apology after Secretary Jung threatened to sue them for wrongful termination on Amara's behalf. But the biggest surprise came from Chairman Lee. 3 weeks after the attack on Secretary Jung, the old man called Amara to a private meeting at the Lee family estate. She went reluctantly, expecting a confrontation, perhaps a final attempt to buy her off or threaten her away from his son. Instead, she found Chairman Lee standing in a traditional Korean garden, his hands clasped behind his back, staring at a koi pond. My wife loved this garden, he said without preamble as Amara approached. She spent hours here, caring for every plant, feeding the fish. She said that a garden taught you patience, that beautiful things took time to grow and couldn't be rushed. Amara waited silently, unsure where this was going. I failed her, Chairman Lee continued, his voice heavy with old grief. After she died, I forgot everything she taught me about patience, about beauty, about what truly matters in life. I threw myself into building an empire, into creating a legacy, because I couldn't face the emptiness she'd left behind. And in doing so, I nearly lost my son, the same way I lost her. He turned to face Amara, and she was startled to see tears in his eyes. Secretary Jung told me something from his hospital bed. He said that he'd never seen Min-hoon truly happy until he met you. That you brought out a kindness and humanity in him that I thought was lost forever. Chairman Lee, please let me finish. He held up a hand. I don't approve of this relationship. I probably never will, if I'm being honest. You come from a different world, a different culture. You represent everything, unpredictable and uncontrollable, in my son's life. But I've watched him these past few weeks, seen the way he looks at you, the way he stands taller when you're beside him. And I realized something. I can either lose my son by trying to control him, or I can keep him by learning to let go. Amara's throat tightened with emotion. I love him, Chairman Lee. I know you don't think I'm good enough for him, but I promise you, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of his love. No, Chairman Lee said sharply. Then more gently, no, Dr. Okafor. He should spend every day trying to be worthy of yours. You saved his life twice. Once from a burning car, and once from becoming like me, cold and alone and obsessed with things that don't matter. For that, I owe you a debt I can never repay. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. This was my wife's. She made me promise that when Min-hoon found someone he truly loved, I would give it to her, regardless of who she was or where she came from. I've been holding on to it for 15 years, waiting for the right person. He opened the box to reveal a delicate jade bracelet, carved with intricate patterns of birds and flowers. She believed that love was like these birds, that it needed freedom to fly. I forgot that lesson, but perhaps you can help my son remember it. Amara took the box with trembling hands. Chairman Lee, I don't know what to say. Say you'll take care of him. Say you'll be patient with an old man who's trying to learn how to be a father again, instead of just a chairman. Say you'll come to family dinner next Sunday, because I'd like to start over, properly, this time. I will, Amara whispered. I promise. The old man nodded, his composure restored, but as he turned to leave, he paused. My wife would have liked you, Dr. Okafor. You have her fire, her dedication to helping others. I think she sent you to us, in a way, to remind us what the Lee family used to stand for, before we forgot ourselves in pursuit of power. After he left, Amara sat in the garden for a long time, the jade bracelet cool against her wrist, thinking about the strange paths that led people to each other. She thought about her mother, who'd never lived to see her daughter become a doctor, but whose sacrifice had made it possible. She thought about Min-hoon's mother, who'd loved gardens and believed in patience and freedom. She thought about how love could bridge any distance, heal any wound if you were brave enough to let it. When Min-hoon found her there, an hour later, she was crying, but they were happy tears. What did my father say to you? He asked, concern evident in his voice. If he threatened you. He gave me your mother's bracelet, Amara said, showing him, and he invited me to family dinner. Min-hoon stared at the bracelet in shock. He's never shown that to anyone, not since she died. I didn't even know he still had it. He said she would have liked me. She would have loved you, Min-hoon corrected, pulling Amara into his arms, just like I do. They stood there in the garden, surrounded by the flowers Min-hoon's mother had planted so many years ago, and Amara felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. This wasn't the life she'd planned. It wasn't the straightforward path she'd imagined when she'd left Nigeria, with her mother's dreams and her own determination. But maybe it was better. Maybe the best stories were the ones you didn't see coming. The ones that challenged you and changed you and made you believe in possibilities you'd never considered. The following months brought challenges, of course. Learning to navigate Min-hoon's world while maintaining her own identity wasn't easy. There were still people who disapproved, still obstacles to overcome. But they faced them together, with the support of an unlikely alliance. Chairman Lee, who slowly learned to see Amara as a daughter rather than a threat. Secretary Jung, who became a fierce friend and advocate. Min Jung and the other hospital staff who'd stood by her when things were darkest. And Amara's family in Nigeria, who'd been skeptical at first but were won over by Min-hoon's obvious devotion to their daughter and sister. Amara threw herself into her medical training with renewed vigor, working under some of the best doctors in Asia. She specialized in emergency medicine, finding that she thrived under pressure, that she was at her best when lives hung in the balance. Min-hoon, inspired by her dedication, began shifting his focus at Lee Holdings toward healthcare and social initiatives, using his family's wealth to fund medical programs for underserved communities. Together, they started a foundation in honor of both their mothers, providing scholarships for international medical students and funding free clinics throughout Seoul. It was a way of honoring the past while building a better future, of turning their painful experiences into something meaningful. 1 year after that fateful night by the Han River, Min-hoon organized a charity gala for their foundation. It was held in a grand hotel ballroom, attended by Seoul's elite, by government officials and business leaders and celebrities. Amara wore a stunning gown that blended traditional African patterns with modern Korean design, a visual representation of the two worlds she now inhabited. As she stood beside Min-hoon, greeting guests and accepting donations, she marveled at how far they'd come. A year ago, she'd been ready to give up, to run away, to accept that some loves were impossible. Now, she stood confidently in his world while maintaining her own identity, respected for her medical skills and her compassion. No longer just the girl who saved Lee Min-hoon, but Dr. Amara Okafor, a force in her own right. Midway through the evening, Min-hoon took the stage to give a speech. He thanked the donors, spoke eloquently about the foundation's mission, and then his tone shifted, became more personal. "A year ago, my life changed in an instant," he said, his eyes finding Amara in the crowd. "I was in a burning car, dying, when a stranger risked her own life to save mine. I thought that was the end of the story, a dramatic rescue with a happy ending. But I was wrong. That was just the beginning." He stepped down from the stage and walked toward her, and Amara's heart began to race as she realized what was happening. The crowd parted, creating a path between them, and suddenly everyone in the ballroom was watching, waiting. "Amara," Min-hoon said, taking her hands in his, "you didn't just save my life that night. You gave it purpose. You taught me what it means to be brave, to stand up for what matters, to love without fear or apology. You challenged me to be better, to use my privilege for good, to see beyond the narrow world I'd been raised in." He dropped to one knee, and Amara gasped, tears already streaming down her face. From his pocket, he pulled out a ring, a stunning piece that somehow managed to incorporate both Korean and Nigerian design elements, a perfect fusion of their two cultures. "I know we faced obstacles that would have destroyed most relationships. I know there are people who still don't approve, who think we're too different, that our love is too complicated. But I also know that every single day I wake up grateful that you exist, that you chose me, that we're writing this story together." His voice broke with emotion, but he pushed through. "Dr. Amara Okafor, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of your love? Will you be my partner, my equal, my forever?" Through her tears, Amara nodded. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, 1,000 times yes. As Min-hoon slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss, the ballroom erupted in applause. But Amara barely heard it. All she could focus on was the man in her arms. The man she'd saved, and who'd saved her right back. The man who'd proven that love really could conquer any obstacle if you were brave enough to fight for it. Later that night, after the gala had ended and the guests had departed, Amara and Min-hoon stood on the hotel balcony, looking out over the glittering lights of Seoul. The city stretched before them, vast and complex and beautiful, just like their future. "Are you happy?" Min-hoon asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Amara leaned back into his embrace, the ring on her finger catching the light. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, all the pain and struggle, and moments when she'd wanted to give up. She thought about her mother, who'd never lived to see this day, but whose spirit she felt so strongly in this moment. She thought about the girl she'd been when she'd first arrived in Korea, lonely and determined, and so afraid of failing. "I'm happy," she said simply. "I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." And as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, looking out over the city that had tested them and changed them, and ultimately brought them together, Amara knew with absolute certainty that this was just the beginning of their story. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome. But they would face them together with courage and love and the unshakable belief that some things were worth fighting for. The girl who'd saved the prince had discovered something along the way. She didn't need saving herself. She'd always had the strength, the courage, the power to write her own story. But having someone to share that story with, someone who saw her for who she truly was and loved her without reservation, that made every page worth reading. In the distance, the Han River flowed steadily through the heart of Seoul, just as it had on that stormy night 1 year ago. The place where everything had begun, where a split-second decision had changed 2 lives forever, where love had been born from chaos and courage, proving that sometimes the most unlikely stories became the most beautiful ones. And as the first light of dawn began to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Amara smiled, knowing that this was not an ending, but a beginning. The beginning of a marriage, yes, but more than that. The beginning of a life built on mutual respect and genuine love, on bridging cultures and breaking barriers, on proving that when 2 people chose each other against all odds, they could create something truly extraordinary. She turned in Min-hoon's arms and kissed him softly, a promise and a celebration wrapped into one gesture. And in that moment, with Seoul waking up around them and their future stretching out like an unwritten book, Amara Okafor knew that she was exactly where she belonged. The girl who saved the prince had found her own happy ending, but more importantly, she'd found her own voice, her own strength, her own story. And that, in the end, was the greatest rescue of all.